Falou pioneer also of the radio waves. What era did you start either becoming aware of Marta, or did you share with Marta? We're talking about 2000s, 90s, something like that. And
more recently, you know, when you hear of someone for a long time, right? You hear a name, and maybe, I think maybe the first time I saw her, she was giving like a speech, or she was just at an event and she was commenting, and just kind of that, like I said, the passion and how articulate she was about the vision and what we needed to do and what she wanted to do and what she was working on in the Clemente. Because the Clemente is such a special space. It's not just a special space in the Lower East Side, not just New York City. It is.
I think it's national. It's national.
Renowned all over the world. Like, people understand, like, this is a space where you can go and be experimental and be yourself and celebrate who you are. So as soon as I saw her, I mean, I guess, I'm going to say not the 90s, but like more recently, I would say in the last few years, especially as I got to know her, and we wanted to make sure that we preserved what we knew was so important about the Clemente. We just, you know, we had to figure out strategy, and we knew that coming together, that we were all stronger in that way as one voice. So
what about the journalist angle? Because I know you have a background in journalists, right? And journalism a little bit. I mean, tell me a little bit about that background in journalism, because that was the backbone of perhaps of Marta's advocacy. So I was wondering if that helped you bond a little bit, or if you realized being having a background in journalism, how that shaped not just the Marta relationship, but also your own outlook as an advocate for the Latino community in New York City through the council.
Right. Again, you know, being a journalist, being a woman of color journalist, when she was not easy, right? You had to really fight hard to make sure that you were in these spaces and that you were getting the opportunities, because still to this day, we don't have the same opportunities as our white counterparts. So I would say, you know, some of the journalists out there, the ones that I read every day, hyper locally and nationally. So like a Claudia Irizaria Ponte, she writes for the City News. Like a Maria Hinojosa that writes.
Hinojosa, right, Maria, yes.
So every level, I think some of those advocates that I follow, specifically Latinas, they are very, very vocal about the issues that they cover. They're women I consider actually quite political. And it wasn't until kind of later on that I realized that, right? Fact-driven, detail-oriented, analytical thinking, which is what you do as a journalist, is something that's really important, I think, as an elected official. And while I was at Marist College studying journalism, and now I'm an elected official, hey, go figure, I worked at the Marist poll, which is, it's called the Marist Institute of Public Opinion. They're the people that call you to ask you your opinion about politics. So I was calling people from all over the country, and as I would hear some of their opinions, of course, I just realized how different we all are, but we have many, many, many common beliefs and common goals. But to being, you know, beautiful and powerful that I think people will believe in.
A woman like Marta, a woman like yourself, I mean, and this is going to go into the journalist side, because I'm very interested in journalism. I have a brother in journalism. I have a lot of, you know, love for the trade. How do you think someone like her, we're losing small outlets, and this is an intersection also between the journalistic interest you might still have and you must have as a Politico, and also as a representing that community. They're kind of like artists. They're artists in their own right. It's a different kind of vibe, but when you have small community-based journals, all right, news outlets, and they're becoming scarcer and scarcer. So when you have a strong opinion, strong advocacy, these are great mouthpieces, but we're losing them. So you got to go corporate, and not everybody is a Maria Hinojosa that can get onto, you know, the mainstream and be able to have that powerful voice, because the mainstream can take, you know, an outfit. You know, news outfit can then take and say, I'm sorry, girl, no, we're not going that way. So how do you think about all this Does the social media fill that vacuum in your experience right now when you're going into campaign? How do we grapple with this loss of biodiversity in journalism?
That is a great way of putting it. So when I mentioned, you mentioned Maria and I mentioned Claudia, who writes at the City. You know, the City News is this great outlet. It's a nonprofit, like many of our good news outlets. Because like you said, sometimes these smaller ones, they get gobbled up by these corporate giants that really control the messaging. And they take away from some of the most local stories and some of the details that I think our people need in terms of how to inform ourselves to make the best decisions, even politically or whatever it is. So for me, like I actually do donate to the City News, right? A small recurring monthly fee. I think we give to WNYC, of course, but there are other smaller outlets and things that I want to make sure that I also represent. And then what I get to do as a city councilwoman is support the institutions that are also cultivating these writers and these artists. And it's definitely disheartening to see local independent publications go under, because they help drive community involvement too. You know, those little free papers that are in the outside that you can pull out of the box or whatever it is here in like the Lower East Side. You know, it's up to each of us to try to support them. Not everyone could support a recurring fee. I get that. But when we gather information about our neighborhood or our city, local news is always going to be relevant. They're always going to cover the human interest stories that we need to hear to keep us grounded. And again, when you look at the ongoing protests and the use of social media to create the mutual aid networks and in terms of food and medical attention and making sure people have water and that everyone knows where they're going and that they stay safe and that they wear a mask. You know, that helps amplify, I think, voices in communities of color. So it has certainly played a role that has been influential.
Well, and then, you know, I see a parallel, you know, looking a little bit through your bio and the opportunities I've had to exchange with you, you know, this remarkable emphasis that you have placed in helping the community stay communities and people stay where they're from. I know you're from the Lower East Side and you have that kind of pride of place. And I find it very similar and different in a way with Marta Garcia, Nelson Landrieu, Mateo, who's very much our surviving founder and a close ally in everything. You know, she created a community. She created an ecosystem, you know, so some artists could stay. Talk to us a little bit about, you know, that sort of lattice, you know, to stay in place. How do you see it? And how do you see the cultural institutions that we have sort of contributing almost like to keep the soil, you know, like the roots keep the soil in the earth so the water doesn't run off with it? What's that kind of symbiosis in your, you know, in your take?
Yeah, I mean, some of the most powerful activism can be found in the beauty or even, you know, I guess the horror that is presented through artistic expression. When you see some of these haunting photos or some of this video or what's going on across the country and you can hear it, you know, that to me is a really important piece of all of this. Cultural institutions are a grounding point for our communities. And right now, our community is at an impasse. Our city is going through an economic crisis. We see the state and city budgets, as I mentioned, that they fail to fully fill in the gaps when it comes to our youth and our senior programming and our housing and our healthcare. And I'm committed to maintaining housing and affordability for the Lower East Side. And I think that not just having programs and services for the sake of having them, but having people who understand that, you know, to be culturally humble. So in many ways, I mean, Latea has preserved the legacy of the Lower East Side by giving longtime residents that platform and that space to be themselves, to share their stories, but you know, also recognizing that we have to cultivate partnerships on larger and national levels. So I think that's what the Lower East Side, our story is based in multiculturalism, and we should welcome those kinds of unique outside perspectives through art in our very local spaces.
Yeah, Marta was she was a big part of the National Hispanic Media Coalition, so she understood that. She was off to Washington. She was very involved with that prior to her husband's taking ill and her taking a lot of care of Nelson in the last 3-4 years. And taking it back to the personal. So I remember a few years back, there was trouble in paradise. We run into trouble in that paradise that is the Clemente Soto Velez every so often. And she said, I got to go see Carlina. When was the last time or that you recall that you saw Marta? Because I know some very dear friends of Marta watch this. We're going to play her voice at the end. So I also want to, to evoke the little bit that we can hold on to at this time.
Yeah, one of the places I certainly remember, and again, still being involved, still fighting until in every opportunity. We were having a meeting with people from the Clemente to really figure out how we can be united, right? How we can figure out how we're going to preserve this space, but be responsible, right? Be fiscally responsible, understand that the mission was the most important thing, right? We had to overcome all of our, differences to fulfill this mission. And I remember that she was there, and before that, she had reached out to me in my office and just saying, we really need you. We really need you to be there for us and to be a voice, because she knew that I supported everything that she represented, which was everything that is like good in terms of our culture and our identity. So she was there still fighting for this space until, the last possible moment. And that's why I think, to lose her so soon, that's what was devastating, because we saw her championing. She was still a champion as of until very, very recently.
She was in great shape. I mean, we were talking twice a week, and then maybe 3 or 4 weeks, then there was a silence and her voice was strained. And next thing, her sister, who I have grown very close to, because we were together with Marta for Nelson's, Nancy Alicea, and she calls me, Miguel, boom. So it's that kind of thing. Nancy, if you're hearing us, here we are con, Carlina talking about Marta. Well, we will talk more a little bit about the cultural institutions, because I think that meeting that you might have had with her and others, I think eventually led to a great new direction, especially a great new leader, a remarkable person that's going to join us very shortly. But before we go there, we have experimented a transformation at Latea, which Marta was very keen on, because she came from media, which was to take Latea from, yes, the theater, which is the basis, but she wanted us to be able to launch more stuff online. And then the team that currently is running Latea, Frank Fantini, and others, especially Tatiana Rondero, we were already working and getting the equipment. So you do your play, we film you, then we launch it, we do movies, then we launch it online. But of course, like everything, we're going relaxed about it because of everything. Funds, we're busy with the people online, the dressing room needs cleaning, where we're going to put all this stuff. And then COVID hit. So I want to segue from that thing that we were getting onto, and that right now we're like, boom, here we are in Latea Remoto with you, to talk about your support for technology. I want to talk about the Union Square Tech Hub, which I find it's a great thing that you're working on. Does that plan, the Union Square Tech Hub, will it also have assistance for smaller nonprofits? And I'm not talking for Latea right now, that's Union Square and stuff. I just mean, what's the vision for this very exciting thing that you have been working on?
I think Latea is the kind of tenant that, we certainly would want inside of this space. So, as we grow, as we continue to fulfill this very, very important mission, I'm so looking forward to working with Libertad and everyone else to make sure that we can do this together. The goal of the Tech Training Center, the Tech Hub at Union Square, is very, very simple. It's an opportunity for underserved New Yorkers and New Yorkers of color specifically, because that's who is underrepresented, not just in the tech community, but really in terms of breaking into those industries and being able to start their own business. So we want to make sure that they have an opportunity to gain a foothold in tech-related industries, because like you said, that was the way that things were going already, right? You want to make sure that Latea Remoto has as much, of an audience as possible. People are watching. And so I think the pandemic, really kind of pushed us a little bit faster into that direction.
Yes.
And actually, I think, the silver lining in it is that people realize that maybe tech is a little bit more accessible than I thought, but there is still so many levels to the resources and to the access that we haven't quite grasped. And so I'm trying to change that by bringing this space into Union Square, close to Loisaida, of course, close to transit, because that's what people, our city is a city of renters and people who take the train, right? We're all still struggling. And so it's going to provide free and subsidized tech training to thousands of low-income women, people of color, students. And in fact, we fought for specific enrollment thresholds for the most disadvantaged in my district, and to make sure that the representation inside the building was minority and women-owned businesses. So it's going to connect New Yorkers to subsidized spaces, which, as you probably know better than anybody, how much every square foot, every square inch in New York City is very, very pricey. So we want to make sure that there's subsidized spaces in the building so people can grow their ideas into startups and nonprofits. That's going to train and hire this new generation of New Yorkers that are certainly going to be more tech savvy than me and you.
Where is the campus? I'm sorry, I researched a little bit, but I don't know if you have chosen a specific campus, or you're going to keep it virtual. Because I mean, as a person from last century, actually, I was born last millennium. Is there going to be a physical actual campus that you're considering, or is it all going to be virtual for this tech hub in Union Square?
No, we're certainly going to have a physical space. It's going to be right on 14th Street. Just off of 4th Avenue near Irving Place. And so right there in that space, of course, when it's appropriate and when the building is finished, it's currently under construction. That's where we're going to have this, job preparedness curriculum with local community partners like Lower East Side Employment Network, Perscolas, Educational Alliance. And then, of course, I think most relevant to you and the show and to everybody in the organization is that we negotiated dozens of days out of the year that community groups could use the building's event spaces for free, because we know that it's going to be very, very important during the recession. And in spite of the recession, it's still very expensive. And so we want those spaces to be there so people can, practice their art, craft their trade, and of course, look toward a brighter future.
Oh, and I saw, or I was part of, because I was very fortunate to have been invited to create a poster for it, how you really helped and were instrumental in the transformation that Libertad Guerra, who I hope can be shown at some point or show herself, did at the Loisaida Center with the whole festival. So I would like, as Libertad considers entering, that you tell me a little bit about your story. Welcome, Libertad. Thank you for joining us, and Carlina especially. Tell us a little bit about your history with the Loisaida Festival and how you perceive that infusion of new energy, of great vibes, and the transformation of a beloved institution that had also ebbed a little bit prior to Libertad taking the helm.
Well, this was like, when we talked about the last time that we were kind of meeting with Marta, there was an individual in the room that was really looking to help us fulfill this achieve this goal of making sure that the Clemente stood united. And Gonzalo Casals, he was there before he became the commissioner of DCLA. And so he's like one of these individuals that I've met and that I've just really kind of gotten a great energy from, and who I know cares about the work. And that's what happened with Libertad. She knows that as soon as I met her, I just really, really felt this energy of not just that clearly she's brilliant and that she knows what she's doing and that she's talented, but she did have a vision and she just wanted support in fulfilling it. And so I told her, whatever you want to do, I'm buying the ticket, I'm going to take the ride. And it has been very, very exciting ever since. And to see that kind of commitment in the Lower East Side be brought out into this public forum, to have this amazing festival that really, really just exceeded everyone's expectations and filled us with so much love and pride. I mean, it is probably one of the most important events of the entire year, clearly, in our community. Everybody comes to that festival. It's amazing. And so to now have that energy here, it's really exciting. And Libertad Guerra is finally joining us, you know, and listen. I am just like you know, I am thrilled that you are in our Lower East Side community. It's not every day that
I wanted to stay connected to it and to you. And I can't believe like my first month there, like all of a sudden we're like in this virtuality to a space that we all love so much and that we have such history on, you know. But oh my God, Carlina and Latea, I want to thank you for hosting this homage to Marta, one of the founders of not just Latea itself, and Latea is one of the founding theaters of the Clemente, but of Clemente itself. She was a crucial figure. I want to thank Carlina, not just for her remarks of this amazing half an hour, but her equally pioneering work as one of the only 2 Latinas on the city council who represents the Lower East Side, Loisaida, and who truly embodies and carries, you know, the constitutive legacy that Marta helped build. So Carlina, like my hat's off to you. I want to thank you for voting no yesterday. That is so Marta Garcia. If there was anything that was courageous and against the current minority vote, my God, it was truly courageous. And I'm really proud of you. I have to say, I was surprised. I know how courageous you are and principled, but I was surprised at that. Marta was an expert in saying yes, in giving opportunities, in opening doors, in experimenting, in building coalitions. But it's also very important in terms of when we're homaging Marta that she was also a master of the righteous hell no. And in saying no to cultural erasure, to lack of community-led futures in New York City, to, you know, displacement, white supremacism, not erasing the contributions of women, and you know, and those many no's that Marta gave was what kept the mission of the founding mission of the Clemente alive, that it hasn't been dissolved and that it goes through ebb and flows, but it's always been there. And Carlina, my God, you se me pararon los pelos, and I just want to commend you for that, you know.
So Libertad, since we're having this dialogue now, and it's you know, the 3 of us are talking, I want to bring it a little bit back to Marta, not on the macro, but on the micro, because I know, I remember very pointedly a Borimix with Manuel Moran, where Marta brought Nelson and we honored them, and you and Moncho were there, and we helped Nelson to the stage, and she was very excited, and we were all hanging out and basking in that moment. We are with you, we're all hanging together, and that was perhaps the last great moment. After that, he passed away. Little did we know that she would follow not long after. Now, what was your last engagement, or what were you and Marta talking about or discussing recently? Because she fought in the last board at the Clemente. She had to leave for Nelson's health reasons. Then we had some vacuum. And then luckily, the Clemente has been fortunate to have you follow up. So when did you pick Marta's brain last?
So, you know, I always knew Marta as a figure, but never like personally. It was mostly during the last 2 years that I came to know her more physically and closely. She was always like this figure that, you know, this legacy figure. But at that point, you know, it was more about pay, you know, I'm so glad that I got to tell her in person, my God, this can't, you know, it can't be run down because of, you know, the pettiness sometimes of the times, you know. And so I try to keep it high level, but also letting her know that in whatever my capacity, because I've always been a fan of the center. The center's played such a big role in my life. And I got the chance to tell her and Nelson that, look, it's because of you guys that I myself was a cultural independent producer. If you hadn't, you know, played a role in building this place, and even in LES History Month, I think I told them, you know, so I did have, while during my last 5 years working in the neighborhood, I encountered them. I told them how important their legacies was. And when I became more directly involved in the Clemente's stabilization and well-being, I did get to talk to her about that. And she, you know, I just felt privileged that she saw in me someone that, you know, that she could trust, and that she knew that I would have the fight to stabilize such a great organization that keeps on giving so much to so many people. But, you know, the reality of it is that many of our organizations have been passing through this austerity even before times of austerity. These are times of great realizations for everyone. But, you know, the Latino community, POC's community, especially institutions, you know, they've known this. It's not really new, you know, and scrappy, and we've been trying to survive against so many odds, you know, and it's a matter of knowing about those lessons. And that's why no nos van a matar, mismo, even if we're underfunded or whatever. But at the same time, this is the time to make everybody knows that justice, you know, there has to be structural in this, and the role institutions like Clemente play. This is what's funny about Marta. She was a media activist, a cultural activist, a Latina woman activist, but she was an institution builder, and her institutions were open, were creative, were full of compromise and openness, right? Even though her character, supposedly, she was famous for being supposedly polarizing. But who would find someone that just stands for the founding mission of a place to be polarizing? Whereas what she leaves behind is something that is just built with openness, with collaboration. The Clemente is like the epitome of a collaborative spirit, if I've ever known an institution that way, of inclusiveness. And you have to measure her by what she leaves behind, and what everybody will know, even if they didn't know her, is the fact that institutions like this, like what Latea is doing, what Clemente stands for, are these bastions of collaboration, openness, but also principle.
But I will take you up on the polarizing for one moment, because I was thinking something along those lines to address both of you, to talk about both of you. When you have strong convictions, like I think Marta had, and I know Carlina does, and I know you do too, Libertad, from what I have experienced of you, of your trajectory, you guys. What do you do when ascribing polarization to you? Like, it's so easy. People then say, oh, she's a fanatic. She voted no. Or she's a fanatic for, like, people use that to discount you, to say, it's, you know, just a fanatic. She's crazy, or you're a cultural fanatic too. She's crazy. How do you creatively work with that? Because if you go ballistic on that, then it's like, yeah, see what I told you, está loca, esa una loca. And I know Marta had to grapple with that in her own home, in her own institution for the past 25 years. I mean, I played all roles. I went against Marta Garcia. I went with Marta Garcia, and Marta Garcia tapped me and said, hey, come here, kid, you know, let me show you something. And I'm very, very happy to have seen 360 degrees of Marta Garcia. Now, how do you guys, let's start with you, Carlina. How do you deal with that? Like, we'll discount you because you're a fanatic. How do you play with deal with that?
Well, you know, you're right. They try to label you, right? Radical or crazy, or she marches to the beat of her own drum. You know, people say that about you. And sometimes it can feel isolating, you know, being that lone person, or the few lone, that minority can be incredibly isolating. And so, you know, while you know that inside that you're trying to make the right decision, you're doing the right thing, you know, you have to grapple with that, the confidence and the trust in yourself. And as women of color, we have to do it on so many different, like, micro levels. So, you know, when you look at someone like her, you look at some of even my own predecessor in the city council, and they're sometimes on an island. You know, you have to respect that principle. That is what they stand for. And so that's what I try to wake up in the morning and say, is like, why do I do this? I do this because I want to make sure that people have access to housing and healthcare and food and education. Like, that's what guides me every single day. But sometimes, you know, having accessible healthcare is not people's priority. So it's an interesting way that you try to change the conversation, and you have to be creative. But in the end, you know, you have to give that speech. You have to stand by what you believe. And that's why in the end, everyone respected Marta. Maybe you didn't agree with her, but they knew that she had to be at the table and she had to be involved in the conversation because she earned it. She earned that seat. And it's not every day that, you know, we get to be a voice or a face at the table. You know, as they say, you got to bring the chair if they're trying to keep you from it, the conversation. So, you know, in that way, it can be difficult. It can be challenging. But, you know, there's people like Libertad who I'm sure go through this kind of thing every single day when, you know, you also want to lift up people who want to be a part of the movement, who don't think that they have a place, or who just like are told that maybe they're too young or too brown to really dictate what their future should look like. And so where's a great place to try to break into that is into arts and culture, to be exactly who you are. And that goes hand in hand with so many movements, civil rights, LGBTQ, Black Lives Matter. So again, it can be isolating. Sometimes you can feel like a lonely woman on an island, but I mean, we're island women, yeah?
And let me tinker with that in terms of putting it out to Libertad. So Libertad, going from that loneliness of sticking by the principle, but I wanted very pointedly to also ask you, Marta era patriota. Y ella all for Puerto Rico all the time, and she was an internationalist. She was married to an Uruguayan, Nelson, our founder. She traveled all over the place. She loved Spain. I mean, so I just want to take that individuality and bring it to the cultural arena, particularly given the Loisaida trajectory and now the Clemente. How does a person like yourself, with a very broad cultural sort of cancha, you know, meaning you've been in Peru producing cultural events, you hang out in the Bronx and also we're producing events there. You've been all over. You were in Brown University talking the other day. How do you do all that? Because you want to attract more people. We're about multiplicity and inclusion. And then keep that Puerto Rican back because we're little and we have our own fights and we have all these needs that are more like social services too, and you know, like the healthcare and stuff. How do you play that balancing game and keep coming back to our Puerto Rican thing within the broad cultural spectrum?
Well, because they're not mutually exclusive, and that's the part of isolation. A lot of people look at, you know, standing strong on your legacies, on your identity, to say that if you're open, that it washes that away. That is a zero-sum game. And that's where people feel threatened. But once you know that it's not a zero-sum game, that actually Puerto Rico includes the world in it. That's what the Caribbean is. It's all the colors. It's being colonized by everyone, and it's been liberated, and you know, and that's also what New York City is. So just because you want to recognize the contributions, the traditions, the legacies, it doesn't mean that at the same time we're, of all the diasporas and specifically some ones that get under-recognized, it doesn't mean that we're also an intra-diasporic kind of melange, and that it's more than the sum of its parts. And you can do both. You can chew gum and walk at the same time. You know, it's only the simplistic view that says it's either Puerto Rican or Latinx, or it's Latinx or Black, or it's Black versus, you know, we're humans, and that, especially in the arts, that's precisely what it's about, is to draw us closer, to understand us from our radical differences, but at the same time our commonalities, our uncommon commonalities, you know. And you know, what good is art and culture if it's not about that?
That's beautiful. And before we go to listen to Mark, I had the privilege of, we were just shooting the breeze at Latea at the end of 2019. And we were going to have all these people that were doing plays, and some people from, you know, Costa Rica were in, and I want to interview this and that. And then we said, and this is also thanks to Rick Herrera, who was there helping us tape, say, Marta, why don't talk to us about Nelson, because he just passed away. So we sat, and then we did another interview. They're short. This is the last of the 10-minute interview. So before we launch, to hear Marta Garcia's fourth interview with me. Sorry, you'll have to hear my voice again, but Marta's voice is very strong. I would like one last word from you, Carlina, for our listeners. You are our leader in the district and in the council. So what give us something that you want us to consider, think about, or, work on?
I would say that all of the work that we do, whether we are, curators or anthropologists or journalists or elected officials or teachers, everything that we have done and how far we have come to have spaces that are inclusive, that recognize the important histories, however brutal they may be, however horrific those histories may be, that, in every single step on that path, there have been people like Marta Garcia who have been fighting to fulfill what is a very, very important vision. And that's that vision of inclusivity, of multiculturalism, of understanding that when you're looking at an issue, it has to be intersectional, it has to be principled. Otherwise, you're never, ever going to be able to move, that movement. And so having someone like her, having a proud Latina, being a very proud Puerto Rican woman myself, to know that everything I do, it's standing on the shoulders of giants. And she had a very big personality, and she had a very big heart for what she was doing, and she will be missed.
Thank you. Thank you for those words. Frank, if you could, let's just go from Carlina to Marta Garcia. Libertad, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Carlina, gracias.
Thank you.
Joining me today is Marta Garcia Landreu, the person that the other co-executive director and artistic director, who was the one that invited me to help her transition when her husband, Nelson Landreu, the founder of Latea with Mateo and Nelson Tamayo, was starting to become ill. And he just recently passed away in October of this year of 2019. So we have devoted a series of 3 programs, right, Rick? We're here with Rick Herrera, our engineer as well. And we've had three podcasts. This is the last one. Well, there'll be more homages and more discussion about Nelson's incredible legacy. But this is the 4th in this series where Marta is sharing with us this whole experience of the theater, the movies, Latea, Rincon Taino, and of course we're right now arriving at the Clemente story and how hard it was and how you guys, had these dark moments, and after all the struggle, you were saying in the last program something about the boiler and $1 million and the credit. Where were we on the Clemente Soto Velez Foundation saga?
Well, there's so much saga and issues, but one of the things that we were able to do that kept us going was that Ed Vega was a writer, and we owed a lot of money for the Con Ed.
Okay.
And the heat, there was no heat. But we had Ed Vega got some royalties from his book sales, and he paid $30,000.
Incredible, the commitment. What about Nelson's relationship with Ed? How did Nelson and Ed meet, and what was the chemistry between these two men?
I don't remember which one of us 3 or 4 then said, we need a board, and we started recruiting people, and somebody, I don't remember whom, said Ed Vega would be he's feisty, he's good to do this, and we brought him on board, and he was on our board of directors. Nelson and I went to his house on 116th Street, brought him over. He fell in love with the idea of the building, the takeover, and right away we said, we need somebody upstairs to administer. He said, I'll do it. And we were like, yay. However, he has such a personality. Again, an issue of Nelson is very lateral, and here is somebody, zigzagging, and the personalities were very different. I clashed immediately, almost after we agreed to, let's do this. There were issues also of a philosophy. My philosophy was very different. I like to branch out. Shout-outs was in a lot of problems, And I said, Ed, we have to help Charras. You know, Chino has a lot of problems and we need to unite. And he said, no, we have to save our own space. And I said, you are wrong. So we parted ways as a result. But
even with the tension, so I'm listening to this and hearing about the tension and of course the different styles, but at least at the beginning or for some time, would an Ed Vega's management of the building and the situations, did that afford Nelson some peace to create in the theater? Because perhaps in spite of all the natural sort of tensions that arise amongst collaborators, because the way I see you and a lot of people saw you, it's the same team, albeit with different philosophies. But was there a time now, like I keep trying to find like a little bit of a space where the artist that did all the effort, had, even if it in perfect circumstances, had the time to direct plays, to host other folks, to do concerts? Was there a time like that? And what time period was that?
And again, it was, I'm giving you my perspective. If Nelson was here, he would give you his perspective.
Of course, yeah.
And then his perspective would be, she complained too much, but I was relieved that I could do everything that you're describing because somebody else was handling and managing the floods and the no heat and the slew of people who were coming in and out of the building to see what was happening.
And what was the vision, if we may, like what was Nelson's vision at this particular juncture? I'm assuming this is 95 to 98 or something like that, or 95, when he has somebody else dealing with the floods most of the time, or for a period of time. What was Nelson's vision when the thing crystallizes a little bit? So there's the building, tons of problems. We have, this guy that was in our board at Latea, who now is handling the building. What was Nelson's vision for Latea at that particular juncture?
It's a collective vision. It was a collective vision. Ed Vega was a visionary. Definitely a visionary.
But I mean at Latea, was he also I'm talking about the theater that you and I are now handling. Was Nelson as a director of the theater, as a theater director, as an actor, not the building philosophy or the building, but just for Latea? What was the direction Nelson wanted or took for Latea as a theater at that time?
He had a continuation of what we did at Rincon Taíno. However, the building was such a huge problem that it was very difficult to think outside of that, because we lived it, we smelled it, we lived with it 24/7 for I think 10 years or more. So it was very difficult until we saw the light. I believe it was in the early 90s when finally the city said, you are the leaseholders. You are the guys who are responsible for this, and so forth. And then Nelson said, de ahí me rajo. I got to produce.
Cool. That was the takeoff of the dream of Latea and of the programmatic.
And we did very, very good in terms of the production qualities.
And this is where you not only did you have great productions that everyone remembers, but also, from what I gather, you also developed some unique educational programs. You had a great rapport with the city as a producing / educational institution. What are your what do you think would be one of Nelson's fondest memory of that time? What would have been like one of those days when you guys got together at the end of the day, whether it be a production, whether it be an education, whether you were just fixing the tables or the chairs? Give us something
the most exciting times for him and for all of us when people got word of, hey, there's some Latinos there and they have a cultural center. We started seeing producers, writers, actors coming in, auditioning for plays we were going to have. And we actually served as an economic base for a lot of unemployed actors. We found a way to pay them. And also would always say, ¿y de dónde vamos a sacar los chavos? And then he would always find a way. He took from Peter to pay Paul, and sometimes didn't even pay the rent, but he paid the actors. So that was, from my point of view, that was a downfall.
Oh, well, but in a way it was a downfall, but we've managed. I mean, now that you and I have tried to continue or are continuing with what you and Nelson started with Mateo and Tamayo, I mean, we are somehow honoring the spirit of Nelson in that we are a very modest but turbine, right? Like where people are coming, and I sense that people are coming back again because they respect that tremendous commitment, that tremendous generosity of spirit, and also certain highlights that they have come to admire and respect on the craft of drama, on the production for Latinos, because we've been shut out, right? But before we go forward, because I would like our engineer, Rick Herrera, who has been extremely generous with Latea in hosting this podcast and promoting it. When we first came in and we were talking about Nelson, you were mentioning that you didn't meet Nelson, or did you meet Nelson?
No, I didn't meet Nelson. When I first was introduced to Anthony, then you, I asked him specifically about the history of the theater, because whenever I go to any type of theater, and at that time I had this one-man show that I was looking for a home to perform it at, I said, what is the history of this? And then that's when they started explaining Nelson. They brought up Nelson and they brought up all the people, and instantly I was inspired and I wanted to perform here, because before I kind of like, it all clicked to me. I was like, wow, they were giving voices to Latinos and artists that needed a home to present their work. And to me, I'm a very spiritual and a true artist in a sense that, like, it's about the passion. And I heard that story and I felt it. And even just walking down in this building, you sense, you can feel the history. And I wanted to know that, and I actually wanted to be a part of that, knowing that at the end of the day, wherever I go, it's like, there's a historical Latino theater, and I knew the history, but I performed there. And to me, that hearing that, being on this podcast and hearing the other series, I'm just honored to hear it, and I'm honored that I even perform even more, because now I got it from the wife. And like, to me, I appreciate you, and I want to give you a hug after this, because it took a team effort to really put this on the map. And you played a part of that as a strong woman, and being the business person as well, and doing the legwork. And then the artists, they also did what they had to do. And I think it was, at the end of the day, it showed a true journey of what hope looks like when you keep on pushing through, no matter what, as long as you believe in something.
We are going to keep revisiting throughout the year on the podcast Nelson's story. I mean, because again, we are so influenced by his genteel ways, by his generosity and spirit. But we want to end this program because time is running out after this tremendous testimonial by Rick, which is like the struggle continues. People keep coming here, that kind of thing. I wanted to ask Marta. So what is? There's been some turmoil recently. It's like we're never out of the woods here at the Clemente, and especially as the Latea, foundational theater of the Clemente. And what do you see going forward? Where do you think we are, and what would be your aspirations, your hopes, and also your fears in as our little ship sails on, these waters?
Wow, that's the $1 million question. I'm very optimistic, very optimistic. Why? The city has come around and elected some elected officials, and more importantly, our community. We started the Save the Clemente coalition, and I was surprised to see how many people started to come on board and basically say, we're there for you, we're there for you. I have a lot of trust in that community. We did it once, and we'll do it again if necessary. I feel more combative, or just as, when we started this. And it's not going to go away. The 29% of the population, Latinos here in New York, is increasing even more with what happened in Puerto Rico and what is happening in Latin America throughout. So I think that population numbers are going to be respected. And I see some of that already. When the tres amigos got together and we started talking to elected officials, I saw some of that. And so that's why I'm trusting that, and more importantly, our community. Our community is not going to allow another Charras or another organization in the city to be lost.
And just to end this program again, dedicated to Nelson's legacy, to the memory of his enormous achievements, both as a human being, as a husband and companion, as an artist, both in film and theater, and as a founder of a theater and a cultural center in the Lower East Side. I at the end, I also, thanks to you and Nelson, I had the privilege of visiting you and sharing some of those moments. But prior to the hardest moments at the end, what was Nelson's feeling, you think, about this direction and the hopes that you're describing and the challenges? How did he feel towards the end? What was your feeling?
I think, well, first of all, I think I would be a myth if I didn't thank you for taking over his, what he called La Nena, which is La Dea. And you've done an incredible job. When you came into the picture, he was more hopeful. He was too ill in the last 2 years or 3 to even think about what was happening or what was to be happening. His whole demeanor changed, and he was more introverted than I have ever seen him for 30 past years. So I cannot tell you what he thought. I can tell you what he would have thought. What he would have thought is, métele fuego, negra, métele fuego. That would have been his last words to me. And then he would also say, y no te preocupes, que todo está bien.